The key was so rusted it barely turned, and the smell that rolled out when the door finally gave was wet wood and 40 years of nobody. My parents stood on the sidewalk behind me, car still running, like they couldn't wait to be gone. That morning, they'd handed me this, a collapsing house at the dead end of Miller Street, and handed my sister a brand new apartment downtown, keys still in the paper sleeve. 3 years later, the day I finally finished this place, my own mother would give me 48 hours to get out. Welcome back to Revenge Range, where the quiet ones finally get their say, and the people who counted on their silence learn they counted wrong. If a story ever made you sit up straighter, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. The handover happened in the driveway of my parents' house on a Saturday, the way they always did family business. Fast, cheerful, and settled before anyone could argue. My father had a folder. My mother had 2 sets of keys. She gave Callie hers first. "It's the corner unit," she said, beaming. "Granite counters, covered parking, the whole thing." Callie schooled and hugged her. Then my mother turned to me and her smile went practical. "And you get Grandma's old place on Miller. It needs a little love, but you're handy. A little love." The porch had sunk 2 in into the ground. Half the roof was tarp. I could see all of that in my head already because I'd driven past it 100 times. Still, I took the key. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that a downtown apartment costs money every month and an old house costs money you can touch, and they just sorted their 2 daughters into those categories without blinking. "Thank you," I said, because I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with my mother was like arguing with weather. My father handed me the folder, a utility bill, a survey map, nothing that mattered. "Water's still on," he offered, like that was a gift. Hallie was already texting somebody a photo of her new keys. My mother watched me turn Grandma's key over in my hand, and something crossed her face. Relief, I think. Like she'd handed off a problem. It would be 3 years before I understood what she'd actually handed off. And by then, she'd want it back so badly she'd give me 2 days to disappear. But that morning, I just nodded and drove to Miller Street and let myself in. I fix old houses for a living, so I know what a ruin sounds like before I fix it. This one groaned when I stepped inside. A long tired, settling the way a house does when it's been holding its breath. I put people's kitchens back together, rebuild staircases that families thought were lost, match a 100-year-old molding profile by hand until you can't tell the new from the old. It's quiet. I mostly do it alone. And I've told myself for years that I like it that way. But standing in that front hall, I stopped being a carpenter for a minute and just became a granddaughter. Because I knew this house, not from driving past it. From inside that banister, my hand knew that banister. The window seat under the stairs where I used to hide with a book. The kitchen doorway with the pencil marks faded. But there, where Grandma Ruth measured me every summer. Nobody had told me. My mother said, "Grandma's old place," the way you'd say a lot number. But the second I was through the door, I understood exactly whose walls these were and that this wasn't a random dump they'd stuck me with. This was the one place on earth I'd ever felt I belonged, falling down around a family that had already stopped caring about it. I set my toolbox on the floor. Dust drifted through a broken pane, gold in the afternoon light. Somewhere upstairs, a shutter knocked against the siding, slow and even, like a knuckle on a door. And I thought, before I thought anything else, "Grandma, what am I supposed to do with you now?" I spent my childhood summers in that house. My parents would drop me off in June and pick me up in August. And looking back, I think they were relieved to have somewhere to put me. Callie was small then, the baby, the one who needed watching. I was the one who could be sent away. But Grandma Ruth never made it feel like exile. She made it feel like an apprenticeship. She'd been a school teacher, widowed young, and she kept that house herself, with a claw hammer and a stubborn streak. She taught me to stand with the grain. She taught me that a stripped screw isn't the end of the world, just a slower afternoon. We reglazed windows together when I was 11. My hands too small for the putty knife. And she never once did the part I could do myself. "You'll thank me," she said, "when you can fix your own life." I didn't understand that then. I thought she meant plumbing. Every good thing I know how to do I learned in those rooms. And the thing I couldn't name until much later, that I mattered there, that I wasn't a problem to be dropped off, I learned there too. So when I stood in that wrecked front hall as a grown woman with my parents' pity gift still warm in my pocket, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like she'd left the door unlocked for me. I walked the whole first floor, slowly touching things, and by the time I'd made a full circle, I knew I wasn't going to sell it, wasn't going to flip it, wasn't going to do anything except bring it back. What I didn't know was that deciding exactly that was the one thing that would change everything. I'm not naive. I knew a house I didn't own on paper was a house I could lose. So, a week in, I drove to my parents' place with a question I'd rehearsed in the truck. If I'm going to put my own money into Miller Street, I said, should we get the deed switched into my name? Just to keep it clean. My father was watching a game. He didn't even turn his head. It's family property, Nora. What's the difference? Whose name is on it? Don't make paperwork out of everything. My mother from the kitchen. Honey, we're not going anywhere. You worry too much. I pushed once more. It's just, if I'm the one fixing it. Then fix it, my father said, pleasant as anything. And that was the end of it. I could have hired a lawyer. But I had no standing to force a transfer of a house that wasn't mine. And pushing harder meant a fight I'd lose and a grudge I'd keep. So, I did the only thing I actually could do. I started a folder of my own. Every receipt for lumber, every invoice for wiring, every hardware store run, dated, filed, photographed. I took a picture of the house from the street that first week, the tarp and the sunken porch. And I told myself I'd take one every season so there'd be a record of exactly what I turned nothing into. I wasn't planning a case. I just knew the way a board is going to warp before it does that a day might come when somebody would need reminding what this had cost me. I closed the folder and drove back to Miller Street. My street now, whatever the deed said. Demolition comes before repair, and demolition is the part that scares people off. You have to make a house worse before you can make it better. I spent that first autumn tearing out what was too far gone. Soft joists that crumbled like wet bread. A back wall where the studs had gone black with old water. It's ugly, filthy work. And I did most of it after my paying jobs, evenings and weekends. Headlamp on, dust mask fogging. My hand split at the knuckles and healed and split again. Some nights I cold so bad I slept in my work clothes. But I'll tell you the truth, I was happier than I'd been in years because for the first time the work was mine. Then one evening in October I pried the plaster off the parlor wall and stopped cold. Underneath, hidden behind a century of L, was the original wall. Hand-planed chestnut paneling, the real thing from trees that don't exist anymore. Somebody had covered it over in the 50s like it was nothing. I ran my hand across it and felt the tool marks of whoever milled it maybe 150 years back. I sat down on an overturned bucket and just looked at it for a long time. This wasn't a tired old house that happened to be Grandma's. This was something. I didn't have the word for it yet, but I knew that whatever I'd walked into was bigger than a fixer-upper and older than my whole family, and that I'd better be careful with it. What I couldn't see, sitting there in the dust, was that this wall was going to be worth more than the apartment, the deed, and my mother's opinion of me combined, and that she would find that out at the worst possible moment. Grandma Ruth was already sick by then, though she'd never have said the word out loud. She came to see the house that November, moving slow, one hand on my arm. I'd cleared a path through the mess so she wouldn't trip. She stood in the parlor and looked at the chestnut wall I'd uncovered, and her eyes went bright and wet. And she didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "You found it?" Like she'd known it was there the whole time. I helped her to the window seat, and she sat catching her breath, and she took my hand in both of hers, thin now, cold, but the grip still there. "Listen to me," she said. "This place is going to outlast all of us. People are going to look at it someday and see money. Your mother will. Don't you let them." I said I wouldn't. She squeezed harder. "I mean it, Nora. Keep it. Don't let it become money." I thought she was just being sentimental. An old woman fretting over her house. I promised her anyway. Easy. The way you promise a sick person anything to see them settle. I didn't know I was signing something. I didn't know those words were a key, and that she'd already turned it in a lock I couldn't see in an office across town with a lawyer I hadn't met. She patted my hand and looked around the wrecked, half-torn room like it was already beautiful. "Good girl," she said. "You always could see what a thing was underneath." Then she asked me to drive her home, and I did. And neither of us said out loud that it might be the last time she'd stand in that parlor. It was. Callie loved her apartment the way you love something you didn't have to earn. She'd have me over sometimes, I think, to show it off more than to see me. And she'd walk me through it like a listing. "Feel this counter. It's real granite, and the parking's covered so my car never gets snow on it." I was genuinely happy for her. Or I tried to be. She's my little sister. Somebody spent our whole childhood teaching me to make room for her, and old training runs deep. But that day, pouring me a glass of wine in her spotless kitchen, she said the thing that put a small cold stone in my stomach. "You know, Mom and Dad covered the deposit for me, and like the first few months till I got settled. Wasn't that sweet?" She said it lightly, like it was nothing, like it was just the kind of thing parents do. I smiled and said that was really nice of them, but I was doing math I didn't want to do. A deposit downtown plus months of rent. That's real money. That's the kind of money that comes out of somewhere. And my parents didn't have a spare pile of it lying around. They were comfortable, not rich. So where had it come from? I thought about the house on Miller that they'd handed me because it needed a little love. And I thought about the number Callie had just said so breezily. And for the first time it occurred to me that maybe the two hadn't been separate decisions at all. Maybe I'd been handed the expensive problem so somebody else could be handed the easy gift. I finished my wine and didn't say a word, but I started paying attention to where the money went. By the start of the second year, the house was rough but livable. One working bathroom, a kitchen I could cook in, floors that wouldn't drop me into the cellar. So I gave up my rented room across town and moved in. It made sense a dozen ways. I'd saved the rent. I could work on the place at any hour. And though I didn't say this to anyone, I wanted to actually live inside the thing I was saving, not just visit it. I moved everything I owned in the back of my truck. One load. That's the whole inventory of my life. Some clothes, a lot of tools, a box of books, and Grandma's old wooden toolbox that she'd left me when she got sick. The first night I slept there, I lay on a mattress on the parlor floor, right under the chestnut wall, and listened to the house. It ticked and settled the way old houses do, but it didn't sound tired anymore. It sounded like it was waking up. I could smell fresh-cut pine from the day's work, and under it the old smell that had never left. Beeswax and dust and something like her. I remember thinking this is the first place that's ever been mine, not on paper. I knew it wasn't mine on paper, but in every way that a house becomes a home by the hands that keep it, it was mine now. And I fell asleep, certain of that in my bones. I didn't know that certainty was about to be tested by the one person who taught me not to expect anything for myself. I just knew I was home. And for a while, that was enough. Sunday dinners at my parents' were mandatory. So, I went. That second winter, sitting at their table with sawdust still under my nails, my father asked how the project was coming. I lit up. I couldn't help it. I started telling them about the chestnut paneling, the original hardware I'd found in the cellar, the way the front stairs had a hand-carved newel post under 3 coats of paint. I was maybe 30 seconds in when my mother set down her fork and said to my father, not to me, "It's sweet, isn't it, that she has a little hobby to keep her busy?" A hobby? I felt it land somewhere under my ribs. I'd given up my evenings, my weekends, my savings, the skin on my knuckles. I was rebuilding a piece of our family's history board by hand, and to her it was a thing I did to fill the time, like knitting. Callie laughed. My father chuckled and went back to his plate, and I sat there and swallowed it because I'd been swallowing things at that table my whole life, and one more didn't seem worth the fight. But I want you to remember that word, hobby. She'd say it again later, at a much worse moment. And by then, it would mean something so different that even she wouldn't be able to say it the same way. That night I drove. No, I went back to Miller Street to my own kitchen, and I stood in it with the light off, and I let myself be angry for exactly 10 minutes. Then I picked up a sanding block and worked the new post smooth until midnight. It was the only answer I had. It turned out to be the only one I needed. The word historic didn't come from me at first. It came from an old carpenter I sometimes bought salvage from, who came by to drop off some period hinges, and stood in my parlor with his hat in his hands. "You know what you've got here?" he said. It wasn't a question. He told me houses like this original chestnut, intact framing a builder's name. You could probably trace, sometimes qualify for the local historic register. That there was a commission in the county that surveyed them. That designation could mean protection, tax credits, real standing. I sat with that for a week. Part of me wanted to keep the house a secret, just mine and Grandma's, but another part heard Ruth's voice. People are going to look at this someday, and understood that the best way to keep a place from being carved up and sold was to get it recognized as something that couldn't be. So, I did the Honora thing. I made a call. I filled out an application to the Harlow Historic Commission myself at my own kitchen table, spelling out the house's age, the paneling, the framing, the family who built it. A few weeks later, a man named Warren came out to do a preliminary walkthrough. He was quiet, careful, the kind of person who runs his fingers along a joint before he says anything. He spent 2 hours in my house. When he left, he turned on the porch step and said, "Miss Whitfield, I've surveyed a lot of houses in this county. You should hear from us sooner than you'd think." He didn't smile exactly, but something in how he said it made my heart go quick and made me wonder for the first time whether I'd just started something I couldn't stop. Getting a house right costs what it costs, and I paid it. That whole second year, my savings ran the wrong direction. Restoration lumber isn't cheap. Matching 100-year-old chestnut means either salvage at a premium or milling new stock and aging it by hand. Period hardware, wavy old glass, lime plaster instead of drywall so the walls could breathe the way they were built. None of it comes from the discount aisle. I kept taking paying jobs to feed the house, then feeding every spare dollar back into it. My emergency fund went first, then the little cushion I'd built for slow winters. I remember the afternoon I moved the last real money I had into the account I used for materials, and I sat in the truck in the hardware store lot and made myself breathe. If anything went wrong now, a truck repair, a bad month, a hospital bill, I had no net, nothing behind me. I'd poured my safety into a wall. Any sensible person would have stopped. But I thought about Ruth saying, "Keep it." And I thought about how close it was. And I told myself I'd rebuild the savings after, just get the house done. I want to be honest, that this was a risk. And I knew it was a risk. And I took it anyway, with my eyes open, because some things you can't do. You can't restore 3/4 of a house and call it saved. So I emptied myself into it board by board, dollar by dollar, and I trusted. God help me. I trusted that doing the right thing all the way through would count for something in the end. That trust was about to get tested harder than my bank account ever was. Around then, Callie lost her job. I only found out sideways at a Sunday dinner when she was quieter than usual and my mother kept refilling her plate like food could fix it. It wasn't her fault, my mother said to the table before anyone had asked. The company restructured. These things happen. Callie stared at her wine. I said I was sorry and I meant it. Losing work is frightening. I'd lived close enough to that edge for years to know. But what caught my attention wasn't the layoff. It was my mother's face. That careful, managing look she got when a problem landed in front of her. The same look she'd had handing me the key to Miller Street. "Don't you worry about a thing," she told Callie, patting her hand. "We'll take care of it, we always do." And Callie let out a breath and let herself be taken care of, the way she always had, the way we'd all been trained for. I looked at the two of them and did more math I didn't want to do. The apartment, the deposit, the rent, the few months, and now a lost job, and my mother promising to take care of it. We always do with what? They weren't rich. There was a limited amount of money in my parents' world and it kept flowing one direction and it had to be coming from somewhere. I didn't say anything. I've learned that at that table the person who says the true thing out loud is the person who gets blamed for saying it. So I filed it away with everything else, and I drove. I went home to Miller Street and I looked at my nearly finished house and I wondered how long we'll take care of it could hold. Ruth got one more visit to the house near the end. She couldn't manage the stairs by then, so she never saw the bedrooms I'd redone. But I got her into the parlor in a wheelchair I borrowed, and I'd worked like a madman the week before so she'd see it close to finished. The chestnut wall was oiled and glowing. The windows I'd reglazed with her decades ago. And this very room held the afternoon light like they were proud of it. She sat there a long time. I stood beside her, not saying anything, letting her look. Finally, she reached up and put her hand flat against the paneling, the way you'd touch a horse's neck, gentle and knowing. "There it is," she said, so soft I almost missed it. "You brought it all the way back." Her eyes were wet and she was smiling, and I had to look away for a second to keep myself together. "You kept your promise," she said. And I said, "I'm not done yet." And she laughed, a small dry laugh, and said, "You are. This is the part I needed to see." I didn't understand what she meant. I thought she was tired and talking loose. But she looked at me then with a clarity that cut through everything, and she said, "Whatever happens, you did it right. Remember, I said so." I promised her I would. I wheeled her back out to the car as the light went orange over Miller Street. She held my hand the whole way. It was the last time she was ever in that house. 2 weeks later, she was gone, and I would spend a long time turning over the strange sure thing she'd said. "You are done." This is the part I needed to see before I finally understood it. Before Ruth died, there was the business with the key, and it told me more than I wanted to know. I came home one weekday to find things moved. Not stolen, moved. A ladder shifted. My tool cart rolled to the wrong wall. And on the kitchen counter, a coffee ring that wasn't mine. My parents had a spare key from the handover, and they'd let themselves in while I was out on a job. My mother admitted it cheerfully when I called, like it was nothing. "We just wanted to see how it was coming. You've done a lot in there." Then, after a pause in a different voice though, "I don't know about that dark wood. It makes the room feel small. And these old houses, honey, you could put so much more into a place that'd actually sell." That was the first time I heard it plain. Not the paneling I'd fought to save, what it could sell for. I stood in my own kitchen holding the phone and felt something shift in the ground under me. "It's not for sale," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's my home." "Of course it is," she said in the tone she used when she decided the opposite. I hung up, and the next morning I drove to the hardware store and bought new locks for every exterior door, and I changed them myself before lunch. It felt drastic. It felt like an overreaction to a coffee ring, but something in my mother's voice had told me that the people who'd handed me a ruin were beginning to notice it wasn't a ruin anymore. And I wanted a door between me and that noticing. I didn't give them the new keys. That was the first line I ever drew with her. It would not be the last. I found out where Callie's deposit came from by accident, which is the only way I ever found out anything true in my family. I was helping my father clear paperwork off the dining table before a dinner and a bank statement slid out of a folder. I wasn't snooping, it was face up in my hand before I understood what I was reading. A transfer dated a couple of years back from an account labeled with Ruth's name. A joint account my grandmother had set up long ago for the girls. She'd once told me, meaning both of us. Meaning something someday for Callie and for me. And out of it, a chunk of money moved the same week Callie signed her downtown lease. My father took the statement out of my hand gently and put it back in the folder without a word. And something in his face told me he knew exactly what I'd seen. So there it was. The gift of the apartment hadn't come from my parents' generosity. It had come out of the one pot that was supposed to be for both of us, spent entirely on one of us, while the other got a house that needed a little love and no money to love it with. The fairness I'd grown up being told to trust had been fiction from the start. I set the folder down. My father wouldn't meet my eyes, and I realized, standing in that dining room, that I wasn't the family's overlooked daughter by accident. I was overlooked on purpose because being overlooked was cheaper. I didn't make a scene. I just carried that cold fact home to Miller Street and set it next to all the others. And I kept building because by then the house was almost the only true thing I had. I finally said something to my mother. Not a fight. I don't fight her. You can't win weather. But I asked her quietly in her kitchen why it had always gone the way it went. Why Callie got the money and I got the labor. She didn't get defensive. That's the thing people never believe about my mother. She doesn't think she's doing anything wrong. She dried a dish and considered it like a reasonable question because Callie needs to be looked after. She said, "And you don't. You never did. You landed on your feet from the time you were little. Your sister isn't built like that." She said it almost fondly, like it was a compliment. Like my whole life of managing alone had earned me the prize of being handed nothing. "So, the strong one gets less," I said. "The strong one gets to give," she corrected and smiled. And I understood that in her world those were the same sentence, and that no argument I could make would move her because she wasn't being cruel. She genuinely believed a thing you build yourself is worth less than a thing you can hand to somebody who can't. That love means propping up the ones who fall and stepping over the ones who don't. I wiped down her counter because my hands needed something to do, and I said, "I'm the strong one." "Got it." And she patted my cheek, pleased that I finally understood, missing entirely that I just heard her say the truest and coldest thing she'd ever say to me. I drove. I went home, and in the truck at a red light on the way to Miller Street, I let myself cry for about a block. Then I stopped because crying doesn't sand a floor. Ruth died in her sleep in the early spring, which everyone said was a mercy, and it was, and it still took the floor out from under me. She was the one person who'd ever looked at me and seen something worth teaching instead of something to be dropped off. I got the call at 6:01 in the morning with a chisel already in my hand. I'd been up before dawn because I couldn't sleep. I set the chisel down very carefully. I didn't fall apart. I've never been a person who falls apart in the moment. It catches up with me later, quieter. I drove to her house and helped with what needed helping, and I was steady, and everyone said how good I was being, how strong. And I let them, because being the strong one was apparently my job in this family, and I'd gotten good at it. But that night, back on Miller Street, I sat on the floor of the parlor, under the wall she'd told me to find. And I finally let it come. Not loud, just a long aching leak of a thing, the kind that doesn't make noise. I'd lost the only ally I had, the only person who'd have stood between me and my mother if it ever came to that. Now it was just me and a house and a promise. I ran my hand over the chestnut she touched a few weeks before and said out loud, "I'll keep it. I told you I would." The house ticked and settled around me in the dark, and I chose to hear it as an answer. I didn't know yet that Ruth, even gone, had left a door propped open for me. I only knew she was gone and I was alone with the work. They started talking about the house before we'd even buried her. That's the part I can't quite forgive. Even now, we were at my parents' place the evening after Ruth passed. The casseroles arriving, the house full of that low funeral murmur, and I overheard my mother in the kitchen with my aunt saying, "Well, once things settle, we'll have to decide what to do with the Miller Street place. Nora's had her fun with it, but it can't just sit there." Her fun with it. Grandma wasn't cold yet, and my mother was already treating 3 years of my life and Ruth's last wish as a phase to be wrapped up. I stood in the hallway with a plate of food somebody had handed me and couldn't feel my hands decide what to do with it. As if it were theirs to decide. As if the deed on paper erased the sweat in the walls. I understood in that hallway that the polite fiction that the house was family property and everyone respected what I'd done had never been real. The second the house had value, it stopped being mine in their eyes. I put the plate down untouched. I didn't confront her. A funeral is not the place, and part of me still hoped I'd heard it wrong. But I drove home that night to Miller Street with a new kind of fear in my chest. The specific fear of someone who's just realized the ground they built their whole life on belongs to someone else on paper. I let myself into my house, and I stood in the dark parlor and thought they're going to come for it. I didn't know when. I didn't know how I'd stop them. I just knew it was coming. At the funeral, a stranger handed me a card and I almost threw it away. He was an older man in a good gray suit, standing a little apart from everyone, the kind of person who's clearly there on business more than grief. After the service, he came up to me, only me, and put a plain card in my hand. "Daniel Fisk, attorney." Miss Whitfield, he said quiet so no one around us heard. I represented your grandmother. When the house is finished, call me. That was all. I said finished. It's basically done. But he shook his head just slightly. The way you tell someone not here, not now. When it's finished, he repeated. You'll know. Call me then. And he nodded once, turned up his collar against the rain that had started, and walked to his car. I stood there in the churchyard holding this card, watching him drive off, completely baffled. What did the house have to do with Grandma's lawyer? Why wait until it was finished? One was my mother's, who'd surely handled her affairs. I didn't have a single answer, but something in the way he'd said it, the certainty, the way it wasn't a suggestion, made the hair on my arm stand up. If you've ever kept a promise nobody clapped for, you already know the feeling of wondering just for a second whether someone somewhere had been keeping score. After all, stay with me. It gets worse before it turns. I put the card in my jacket pocket. That night I put it somewhere I wouldn't lose it. In Grandma's old wooden toolbox, in the tray with the finished nails, the box she left me. When the house is finished, call me. I had no idea that one short sentence was the whole story, folded up small, waiting. I didn't call Daniel Fisk. Looking back, that restraint saved everything. Though I couldn't have told you why at the time, the house wasn't finished. It was close. A person could live in it and did. But I knew the difference between livable and finished. The way only someone in my trade knows it. There was still the front door. The original front door. Ruth's door. Thick old oak with a carved panel had been ripped off decades ago and replaced with a hollow modern slab. I'd found the real one in the cellar, split and worked and painted over, and I was slowly, carefully bringing it back to life on a pair of sawhorses in the parlor. Until that door was rehung, the house wasn't done. So, I didn't call. Fisk had said when it's finished, and something in me insisted on honoring that exactly, even though I had no idea it was a condition of anything. I just felt that a man that precise meant what he said, and that calling early would be like sanding against the grain. Wrong somehow. So, the card sat in the mailbox, and every few days I'd see it when I reached for a finish nail, and I'd wonder. It became a small private mystery I carried while I worked. Some nights, I'd take it out and read it again. Daniel Fisk, attorney, like it might have changed. It never had. I'd put it back and pick up the door and keep bringing the old oak back from the dead, grain by grain. I didn't know I was working toward a threshold. I thought I was just finishing a house. Turns out those were the same thing, and the last board I set would open a door I couldn't imagine. The last stretch of a restoration is a strange, feverish thing. You can see the finish line and it makes you a little crazy. That whole third year I pushed harder than was smart. I was broke, genuinely broke, running the truck on fumes some weeks, and exhausted in a way that had gotten into my bones. But the house was so close to right that I couldn't slow down. I refinished the last floors on my hands and knees. I hung the wavy old glass I'd been saving. I got the kitchen exactly the way Ruth had kept it, down to the little shelf where she stood her cookbooks. I worked until my hands wouldn't close some nights, then soaked them in warm water and went back at it. People in my trade will tell you a house tells you when it's tired of you, when to stop fussing and let it be. This one wasn't there yet, but it was getting close and I could feel it. And the closer it got, the more that lawyer's card seemed to hum in the mailbox, like it knew something I didn't. I want to be clear that I wasn't chasing a payoff. I didn't know there was one. I was just a woman finishing the thing she promised a dying woman she'd finish. Pouring the last of herself into old oak and chestnut because that was the deal I'd made out loud. Holding Ruth's cold hands. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something gathering. The house, the card, my mother's new interest in what to do with it. 3 threads pulling toward the same knot. I just couldn't see yet what the knot was. I bent back to the floor and kept sanding toward it. Warren from the Historic Commission called on a Tuesday and his voice was different than before. Careful, but with something underneath it, like a man sitting on good news he isn't supposed to spill yet. Miss Whitfield, he said, your application cleared the survey stage. The full commission wants to hold a hearing. I won't get ahead of the process, but I'll tell you. In 15 years, I haven't seen a private restoration documented and executed like yours. That chestnut, the framing, the fact that you can prove every stage, the commission is going to want to see it. He gave me a date a few weeks out and told me to be ready to speak briefly about the work. Then softer, off the record. You did something rare here, people should know. I hung up and stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand for a while. A hearing recognition, the thing I'd half hoped for when I filed the application, protection for the house, a wall between it and anyone who'd want to carve it up, was actually coming. But under my relief was a flicker of something colder. Because I'd been in this town my whole life, and I knew how fast news travels in Harlow, and I knew that historic designation was going to come with a second word, close behind it, one that made certain people's ears prick up. Valuable. The neighbors were already slowing their cars in front of the house. The word was already moving, and somewhere across town, I knew without being told, my mother was going to hear it too. I marked the hearing date on the calendar in the kitchen. Then I stood there and wondered which would reach her first, that the house was history, or that it was worth a fortune. Callie came by the house for the first time in nearly a year, right around then, and it did not go the way old visits went. She stood in the doorway a second too long before she came in, taking it in. The restored front hall, the glowing wood, the light. I watched something move across her face that wasn't quite happiness. Wow, she said. Nora, it's wow. I gave her the tour because I was proud. God help me. And I wanted my little sister to see what I'd made. She trailed a hand along the banister the way I had years before. But where mine had been recognition, hers was appraisal. In the parlor, she stopped at the chestnut wall and said, without seeming to notice, she was saying it out loud. This must be worth a fortune now. Not, it's beautiful. Not, you did this by yourself. That's incredible. Worth a fortune. I felt the old cold stone settle in my stomach again. I didn't do it for money, I said. She turned and there was something almost pitying in her look. The look my mother gave me. The family look. I know, she said. That's kind of the problem, isn't it? You never do. And then she laughed like it was a joke and asked if I had any of that good coffee. But the thing had been said. In my family, when somebody says a thing like that lightly and then laughs, it's not a joke. It's a rehearsal. I made her coffee and we talked about nothing. And the whole time I understood that my sister had just walked through my life's work and priced it, and that whatever conversation my mother was having in her own kitchen, Callie was already halfway inside it. I rehung Ruth's door on a clear, cold morning, and I knew the second it swung true that the house was finished. It had taken me weeks to bring that old oak back, steaming out the warp, gluing the split, stripping 7 decades of paint down to the grain, oiling it until the carved panel came alive again. I set the original hinges I'd found in the cellar, the ones with her house on them from the start. And when I lifted it into place and drove the last pin and swung it, it moved like it had never left. Silent and heavy and right, and it settled into the frame with a sound I can only describe as a house exhaling. I stood there in the doorway with my hand on the wood, and I felt Ruth so strongly it was almost like she was standing behind me. You brought it all the way back. I understood finally what she'd meant that last day. This is the part I needed to see. She'd known. Somehow she'd known this door. This exact moment was the finish line. Not the floors, not the wall, but her door rehung by my hands. I stood there a long time in the light coming through the wavy glass, and for once I didn't think about my mother, or the money, or what was coming. I just let it be done. 3 years, every dollar, every split knuckle. It was finished, and it was beautiful, and it was hers made new. And that word Fisk had said drifted up from the mailbox in the corner of my mind. When the house is finished, call me. It was finished. But I didn't reach for the phone. Not yet. First, I wanted one clean day of just having done it. The hearing was in the town hall, and I'd never been so nervous in my life. I'm a person who works alone in quiet rooms. Standing up in front of a commission and a scatter of neighbors to talk about my own work was its own kind of terror, but I did it. I told them about the house, about Ruth, about the chestnut wall and the original door. about doing it by hand over 3 years. I showed them my folder, every dated photograph, every stage, the whole record I'd kept from that first suspicious week. When I finished, the room was quiet in a way that felt good instead of bad. Wani spoke and the commission conferred, and then the chairs said the words. The house on Miller Street was being entered on the local historic register, effective immediately as a site of architectural and community significance. People clapped. Actual clapping for me, for the quiet one. I stood there, flushed and overwhelmed, and for one bright second, purely happy. And then I saw her. My mother was standing at the back of the room. I hadn't known she was coming. Nobody had told me she knew. She was clapping too, lightly, a small, polite clap. But she wasn't looking at me, and she wasn't looking at the photographs of the house. She was looking down at a piece of paper in her hand. A printout folded once, and I realized across that whole crowded room that it was a property assessment. She'd already pulled the number. She'd come to my moment not to see what I'd built, but to find out what it was worth. Our eyes met. She smiled at me, and the bottom dropped out of my good day because I knew that smile always came right before she took something. The number came back a week later, and it changed the weather in my family overnight. A restored, registered historic home. Original to the region, one of only a handful left. The appraisal came in higher than I'd let myself imagine. High enough that people said it out loud with a little laugh of disbelief. High enough that the word millions started floating around. First as a joke, then not as a joke. I didn't celebrate. I'd spent 3 years pouring myself into this place precisely so it wouldn't become money because Ruth had begged me not to let it become money, and now money was all anyone could see. Within days, my mother's language shifted. And I mean it shifted completely. It was never your project anymore. Never even Grandma's old place. Now it was the family's asset. She said it on the phone, casually testing it out. We really need to sit down as a family and talk about the asset on Miller Street. The asset. As if 3 years of my life had a line item on a balance sheet somewhere with all our names on it. As if the sweat in those walls belonged to everyone equally now that it had a price. I stood in the finished parlor under the wall Ruth had made me swear over, and listened to my mother turn a home back into money in real time. And I felt the ground I'd been building on start to tilt. She wasn't asking whether the house was mine. She'd already decided it wasn't. She was just deciding out loud whose it was going to be instead. And I knew the way I'd known she'd come for it since that funeral hallway that the answer she'd landed on wasn't going to be me. They came to the house together, my mother and Kaylee, to talk about the future. That should have told me everything. You don't bring the beneficiary to a neutral conversation. My mother walked through my restored rooms like an inspector, complimenting things in a way that felt like she was praising them. You really did do a lovely job, honey. That's what makes it such an opportunity. An opportunity. Callie hung back, quiet, arms crossed, not meeting my eyes. My mother settled at my kitchen table like she owned it and laid it out gently, reasonably, the way she lays out everything. Here's the situation. Your sister's had a rough go. The job, the money, she needs stability, and you've always been so capable, Nora. You don't need this the way she does. So, we think as a family, the fairest thing. Stop, I said, not loud, just enough. This is my home, I live here. I built it. My mother smiled, that patient smile. Sweetheart, you renovated it. That's not the same as owning it. Let's not confuse the two. I stood up because I needed to be on my feet for what I could feel coming. You need to leave, I said. Both of you. I'm not doing this today. And here's the thing. They went. My mother gathered her purse unbothered because she wasn't worried. She had all the time in the world and every card in the deck, and she knew it. We'll talk when you've calmed down, she said at the door, which is what she says when she means, we'll talk when I've won. Callie paused on the porch, and for a second I thought she might say something real. She didn't. She just looked at the door I'd rebuilt. And then she left. I shut it and leaned against it and tried to breathe. My father came by alone the next day, and for about 4 minutes I thought I had an ally. He stood in the finished front hall and looked around like he was seeing it for the first time. And maybe he was. I didn't realize, he said quietly. What you'd done in here. It's your grandmother would have. He couldn't finish it. He rubbed the back of his neck the way he does when something's bothering him past his ability to say it. Nora, this isn't right. What your mother's doing. You put your life into this place. My heart lifted so fast it hurt. This was my father finally actually seeing it, actually saying it. So you'll talk to her, I said. You'll tell her. And I watched it happen. Watched the small courage drain right out of his face, replaced by the tiredness of a man who's lost every argument in his marriage for 40 years and knows it. You know how she is, he said. Once she's decided something, he looked at the floor. I wanted you to know I see it. That's all. That's all. He'd come to tell me he agreed with me and could do absolutely nothing about it, which is somehow worse than not agreeing at all. He patted my shoulder on his way out, the same shoulder that had carried this whole house, and he left me exactly as alone as I'd been before. Except now I knew for certain that no one was coming. Ruth was gone. My father was a bystander in his own family. It was me against my mother, and my mother held the deed. I stood in the hall. He'd admired and understood that whatever I was going to do, I was going to have to do it by myself, the way I'd done everything. My mother came back Thursday, and this time she came to close. No Callie, no pretense of a family discussion. Just her at my kitchen table with a folder of her own. And wasn't that a thing? My mother with a folder. She spread it out like a hand of cards. I've been patient, she said. But you're not being reasonable, so let me be plain. She'd talked to a realtor. She had numbers. She had a plan for splitting the proceeds that gave Callie the lion's share, because she needs it, and gave me a fair amount for your trouble. My trouble. 3 years of my life priced out as trouble. A tit for the help. You've had your fun with the house, she said. And there it was again. The word she'd used, the first winter dressed up in a new coat. It was a nice hobby, but it's time to be adults about the asset. A nice hobby. I looked at my mother across the table I'd built, in the kitchen I'd restored, in the home I'd made from a ruin she'd handed me to be rid of. And I felt something in me go very still and very clear. It was never a hobby, I said, quiet. Even it was a promise. She waved that off like a fly. To who? Your grandmother's gone, Nora. She's not keeping score. She smiled. Gentle, certain, the most dangerous version of her. Nobody's keeping score but us. So, let's be smart. And she pushed her folder an inch toward me across all my work and waited for me to sign my life away politely, the way I'd signed away everything at that table since I was a child. I didn't touch the folder. I just looked at her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look away first. When I didn't sign, my mother's patience finally cracked and I saw the thing underneath it. She sat back and the warmth went out of her face like a light switched off and she said the words, I will hear for the rest of my life. Fine, then let me be clear, since you want to be difficult. She folded her hands. We're taking it back. The house is your sister's now. It's decided. You have 48 hours to get your things and leave. 48 hours for 3 years of my life. For every dollar and every split knuckle and the last promise I ever made, a dying woman. I didn't gasp. My hands stayed folded. I sat very still in my own kitchen and let the words go all the way through me. And I think my stillness unsettled her more than shouting would have. You can't do that, I said finally. This is my home. It's not, she said. And now she was almost sorry, almost kind, which was the worst part. Honey, I know you feel like it is, but feelings aren't a deed. She stood, gathered her folder, smoothed her coat. 48 hours. Don't make this uglier than it has to be. Take what's yours and go, and we can all stay a family. Take what's yours. As if anything in that house wasn't mine. As if my whole self wasn't in those walls. She walked to the front door, Ruth's door, the one I'd raised from the dead, and she opened it without a thought for what it had cost me, and she left. I sat in the kitchen as her car pulled away. 48 hours. That's what she gave me for 3 years of my life. If you'd have walked out right then, packed a bag, and gone to keep the peace, tell me in the comments. Because I'll be honest with you, for about an hour, sitting there in the dark, that's exactly what I thought I was going to do. I called her back that night, one last try, and asked her plainly, how could she even do this? Take a house I'd rebuilt with my own hands and my own money. And she told me exactly how, in a voice so calm, it frightened me more than anger would have. Because your name isn't on it, Nora. It never was. The deed is in mine and your father's names. It's always been in our names. I said, but the money, I have every receipt. Your name is on the receipts. She said it was never on the deed, and she let that sit because she knew what it did. All my careful documentation, the folder I'd kept since that first suspicious week, every dated photograph proving I'd turned a ruin into a treasure, it proved I'd done the work. It didn't prove I owned a thing. In the eyes of the law, I was a person who'd spent 3 years and every dollar I had improving somebody else's property for free at their pleasure. And now they wanted their improved property back. I sat down on the parlor floor under Ruth's wall, and for a while I couldn't feel my body. She was right. On paper, she was completely right. I'd been so careful, and I protected the wrong thing. I'd built a case for the labor and never secured the ground under it because the ground had never been mine to secure, and every time I'd tried, they'd waved me off. It was the perfect trap. And the terrible part was that no one had had to set it. It had just always been there, and I'd built my whole life inside it without knowing. Your name is on the receipts. It was never on the deed. I put my head in my hands. I had lost. I want to tell you about the hour I almost gave in because it's the truest part of this whole story. I sat on the parlor floor most of that night, and I let myself really consider just leaving. Packing my tools, loading the truck, driving away, and letting them have it. And the reason I considered it wasn't just that I'd lost on paper. It was something older and worse than that. My whole life being the good one meant giving way. Being loved in my family meant being the daughter who didn't make trouble, who took the ruin and said, thank you. Who let Callie have the bigger piece and smiled. If I fought this, if I actually fought, I would stop being that daughter forever. My mother had made it clear. Take what's yours and go, and we can all stay a family. Fight. And I'd be the greedy one, the one who tore the family apart over money, the villain of every story she'd tell for the rest of her life. She'd handed me a choice dressed up as no choice at all. Walk away and keep them or keep the house, and lose them, and lose the only version of myself they'd ever approved of. The one who nolly gave things up. And I understood, sitting there in the dark, that this was the real trap, the one deeper than the deed, not the house. Me, the person I'd been trained to be, would hand over the keys and cry quietly and call it love. I ran my hand across Ruth's chestnut wall in the dark and asked her out loud what I was supposed to do. And in the silence that came back, I heard her clear as the day she said it. Keep it. Don't let it become money. Don't you let them. Sometime after midnight, I got up off the floor and went to Grandma's toolbox and I took out the card. Daniel Fisk, attorney. When the house is finished, call me. It was finished. Call me. It was finished. Ruth's door hung true in its frame. Every board was set. I'd been carrying that card for over a year, waiting for a finish line I didn't fully understand. And now, I stood in the dark kitchen, holding it and holding my phone. And I understood that this was the edge of something I couldn't step back from. Because here's what I knew and what I didn't. I knew that if I called this lawyer, I was choosing to fight. I was choosing to stop being the daughter who gives way. Once I made that call, there was no version of me left who quietly packs the truck and keeps the peace. That person would be gone for good, and I didn't know what Fisk would even say. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I'd call and he'd have no answer for me, and I'd have burned my family down for a stranger's cryptic sentence at a funeral. Maybe I'd lose the house and them both. My thumb hovered over the screen. I thought about Ruth pressing that card into no one's hand but mine. I thought about when the house is finished, not before, as if the finishing itself was the price of admission to whatever this was. And I thought about my mother's certainty. So total, so unbothered, the certainty of a woman who has never once imagined losing. I wanted more than I'd wanted anything in years to shake that certainty. So I stopped hovering. It was almost 1:02 in the morning. I didn't care. I pressed the number, put the phone to my ear, and listened to it ring in the dark. He answered on the third ring, wide awake, like he'd been expecting a late call for years. "This is Fisk." I said, "It's Nora Whitfield, Ruth's granddaughter. You gave me your card. You said to call when the house was finished." There was a pause and then quietly, "Is it finished?" "I hung the front door last week," I said. "Her door, it's done." I heard him let out a long breath. The kind you let out when something you've been holding for a long time can finally be set down. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I'm sorry it took a hard night to make you call. I guess your mother's made some kind of demand, am I right?" I sat down slowly. 48 hours, I said, to leave. "She says the deed's in her and my father's names. She says it's not mine." "I know exactly whose names are on the deed," Fisk said. And there was something in his voice now, something almost gentle and almost like triumph. "And I need you to listen to me carefully because your grandmother spent the last years of her life making sure this exact night could not end the way your mother thinks it's going to end." My heart started pounding. "What are you talking about?" "Not on the phone," he said. "Are your family planning to come by soon to move your sister in tomorrow morning?" I said, "Bringing boxes." "Then I'll be there at 8. Fisk said, "Before they arrive, don't tell them I'm coming. Don't tell them anything. Just let it happen the way it happens." And then he said the thing that kept me up the rest of the night. "Your grandmother saw all of this coming, Nora. She left you a door too. You just finished building the one that lets you open it." Fisk got to Miller Street at 8 sharp before anyone else and sat at my kitchen table and finally told me the truth my grandmother had built. "Ruth came to me almost 4 years ago," he said, laying a folder on the table, a real one, sick, official, before she got too sick. "She was very clear-headed and very worried about exactly what's happening to you now." He opened it. "She didn't trust your parents with this house. She loved them, but she knew them. She knew that the second it was worth something, they'd take it from whichever child had earned it and give it to whichever child was easiest to indulge." I felt the hair on my arms stand up again. "So what did she do?" "She created an irrevocable trust," Fisk said, "and she transferred the house on Miller Street into it, while she was still fully competent with me as trustee. We signed the deed over to the trust right here in my office, and I recorded the new deed at the county registry the same week, filed, stamped, and public. Your parents' names are on an old deed, yes, but an old deed in a drawer doesn't mean anything once a newer one is recorded over it. The registry is the truth, and the registry has said the trust owns this house for going on 4 years." I stared at him, but how did they never find out? Because Ruth never told them and they never thought to look. He said simply, "She let them keep their old paper copy." People who are certain they own a thing don't drive down to the county office to check whether they still do. Your parents believe the deed in their file cabinet, and no one ever had reason to pull the record until now. The house hasn't legally belonged to them for years. They've been at most caretakers who didn't know they'd stopped being owners. I stared at him. "They don't know. They have no idea," he said. "Ruth wanted it that way. She wanted the house to go to the person who proved they deserved it without anyone gaming the outcome." He looked at me steadily. "Your grandmother didn't leave the house to your parents, Nora. She left it to whoever kept it." I sat back. Every time my father had waved me off, "It's family property. What's the difference whose name is on it?" He'd been wrong and hadn't known it. Every time my mother had called the house the asset, she'd been dividing up something that was never hers. 3 years I'd spent afraid of a deed that had already been quietly, completely undone. "But it's not automatic," Fisk went on, and my stomach tightened again because nothing in my family ever came free. "Ruth put a condition in the trust. She was too smart to just hand you a house. She wanted to know for sure it went to the right person." He turned a page toward me so I could read it, though the language was dense. "The trust names as beneficiary whichever descendant restores and continuously maintains the ancestral home, living in it while the work is done for a period of no less than 3 years from the day they take it on." And Ruth was too careful to leave that to anyone's opinion. She wrote in exactly how the trustee has to prove it. 4 things spelled out. Continuous residence at this address, month to month from public record. A dated photographic record of the restoration, beginning to end. Receipts and invoices for the materials and the work. And formal recognition of the house's preservation by the local historic authority. All 4. or it doesn't count. Meet everyone, and the house is yours outright. Miss a single one and it passes to the next descendant who will. Not the one who inherits it on paper, the one who keeps it and can prove it, line by line. I read it twice. 3 years of keeping it documented 4 ways. I did count in my head and my breath caught. I'd taken on the house 3 years ago this season. Moved into it partway through and never once stopped working it or living in it since continuously all the way to the day I hung her door. You've met every part of it, Fisk said, watching my face to the math. I've pulled your utility records and your registration. They show you never once stopped living here. The historic register entered the house last week. I have the filing. And I understand you've kept a folder of your own since almost the beginning. Every dated photograph, every receipt. I thought of the folder I'd started out of fear that first suspicious week, and something in my chest went still. That folder isn't just proof you did the work, Nora, he said quietly. It's the exact proof Ruth's trust asks for. She never got to tell you that keeping it would matter. You did it anyway. You qualified, and then you finished, and then you called. Exactly the order she hoped for. He closed the folder. And there's one more thing. The house isn't all Ruth left in the trust. She set aside funds along with it. A considerable amount she'd saved and invested quietly over the years, meant to go to the same person so that whoever kept the house would never have to be afraid of money again. I couldn't speak. All those years, I'd been draining my savings into these walls, terrified, no net beneath me. And the whole time waiting behind a condition I was unknowingly fulfilling was the exact security I'd sacrificed. How much? I finally asked. He told me, and the room went very quiet. You'd think I'd have felt triumphant. I didn't. I sat at my kitchen table with a lawyer, and the truth that I owned everything, the house, the money, all of it, free and clear, and had for weeks without knowing. And what I felt was strangely quiet because I finally understood what Ruth had done, and it undid me a little. She hadn't left me a house. She'd left me a way to find out who I was. 3 years of wasted labor. 3 years of my family calling it a hobby. 3 years of pouring myself into walls with no net and no thanks. That wasn't the thing I had to survive to earn the reward. That was the reward. The keeping was the point. She'd known that if she just handed me the house, my mother would find a way to take it, or I'd hand it over myself to keep the peace. So she'd built a test only love could pass, and I'd passed it without ever knowing I was being tested by doing the one thing I'd have done anyway. Fisk asked me how I wanted to handle the morning. I could see he had options ready. Cease and desist letters, a locksmith, police if it came to that. Ways to keep my family from ever setting foot on the property again. Clean, cold, and completely within my rights. I thought about it, and then I thought about Callie already loading her boxes across town, and my mother already certain she'd won, and I made a decision that surprised even me. Don't warn them, I said. Let them come. Let them walk in, and you'll be here, and the trust will be here, framed on the wall. Let them see it for themselves. Fisk studied me a moment, then nodded slowly. You're sure? I'm sure, I said. Let it happen the way it happens. They came at 9, all of them, and it turned into something bigger than any of us planned. Callie's car pulled up first, trunk stuffed with moving boxes, and behind it, my parents' car, and behind that, I hadn't expected this, Warren's truck from the Historic Commission, because today was the day he'd arranged to mount the bronze plaque on the house, and no one had thought to tell him the family was staging an eviction the same morning. 2 neighbors drifted over to watch the plaque go up. So, there was a small crowd on the sidewalk of Miller Street when my sister climbed out of her car and started pulling boxes onto the lawn like she was moving into a place she'd never even helped paint. My mother got out smoothing her coat. All business, already looking at the house like a landlord doing a walkthrough. My father came slow behind her, eyes down. Nobody knew that Daniel Fisk's car was already parked around the side, or that he was sitting in my restored parlor with a framed document propped on the mantel and a folder on his knee. Nobody knew the ground had already moved under them. Callie hefted a box and headed for the porch, calling back over her shoulder, Mom, do you want the bedroom boxes upstairs or? And my mother said, just get them inside. We'll sort it out. and my sister climbed the porch steps of the house I'd raised from a ruin, reached for the handle of Ruth's door, and pushed it open like it was already hers. I stood in the front hall, waiting. I heard her footsteps cross the threshold, and I watched my little sister take 3 steps into my finished house and stopped dead. She froze the second she was fully through the door, box still in her arms. And I watched the whole thing fall apart in her face because Callie had been picturing a place she could just move into. Nora's little project finally done. A free house handed over. What she walked into was different. She walked into something alive. The morning light was pouring through the wavy glass I'd hung and lying gold across the chestnut wall Ruth had made me find. The restored floors glowed, every detail sang. It didn't look like a house you take from someone. It looked like a house someone had loved back to life with their bare hands. And you could feel that the second you crossed the threshold, the difference between a property and a home. And then Callie's eyes went past the wall to the mantel where Fisk had propped the framed trust document, thick and official, and turned to face the door. And to the man in the gray suit sitting quietly beneath it, hands folded, watching her come in. The box slipped in her arms. "Nora," she said, and her voice had gone small and uncertain. The voice of someone who's just realized the ground isn't where she thought it was. "What? Who is that?" Behind her on the porch, I heard my mother's heels on the steps. "Callie, why are you just standing there? Get the..." And then my mother came through Ruth's door too, into the house she'd come to take, and I watched her see the same 3 things in the same order. The beauty, the framed document, the stranger beneath it. And I watched my mother, who I had never once in my life seen at a loss, stop talking mid-sentence with her mouth still open. Daniel Fisk stood up. He was unhurried, courteous, the calmest person in the room. And that calm did more than any shouting could have. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said to my mother. "Mr. Whitfield, my name is Daniel Fisk. I was Ruth Ansley's attorney. I'm the trustee of her estate." My mother found her voice, but it came out thinner than usual. "Her attorney?" "I don't understand, Nora. What is this?" "I think it's best I explain," Fisk said, and he lifted the framed document off the mantel and held it so they could see it. And he spoke plainly, so there'd be no mistaking any of it. "Some years ago, while she was fully competent, Ruth Ansley placed this house into an irrevocable trust with me as trustee. The deed you believe you hold was superseded at that time. This house has not legally belonged to you for nearly 4 years. You've been caretakers of a property that was already spoken for." The silence in that front hall was total. Warren in the doorway with his plaque and his drill went very still. The neighbors on the porch stopped whispering. "That's not possible," my mother said, but the certainty had drained out of her voice. "The deed is void," Fisk said gently. "I have the recorded documents. You're welcome to have your own lawyer review them. They'll tell you the same thing." He turned the frame toward me. "The trust names a single beneficiary. The person who took this home on, restored it, and continuously maintained and lived in it for no less than 3 years. Not the person named on any old deed, the person who kept it." He looked at my mother and then at Callie, and then he said it clearly enough for the whole room, the neighbors, and Warren, and all of them to hear. "That person is Nora. This house is hers. It has been legally for over a month. There was never anything here for either of you to take." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Callie set her box down on my floor very carefully, like it had gotten heavy, and when she straightened up, her face had crumpled. "Nora," she said, and her voice cracked. "Nora, I have to tell you something because if it's really yours." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "The apartment, it's not mine. I never owned it. I rent it. Mom and Dad covered the start and then it was on me, and I couldn't. I lost my job and I've been putting the rent on credit cards for months, and I'm so far under, I can't see out. This house was supposed to be..." Mom said it would fix everything. She was crying now. Ugly and real. All the polish gone. "If it's yours, then I have nothing. I have nothing, Nora." And there it was, the whole rotten architecture of it, exposed at last. The downtown apartment that had looked like the prize was a rented cage she'd been drowning in. My mother had spent Ruth's money to stage a life for Callie that Callie couldn't hold up, and then reached for my house to prop up the collapse. My mother rounded on Fisk, and the composure finally shattered, and she said the cruelest thing she had left aimed at me. You think a piece of paper makes you better than us? You think a deed makes you family? After everything we did for you? She was breathing hard, spots of color high on her cheeks, and I understood I was watching my mother lose control for the first time in my life. Because for the first time in her life, she was holding a losing hand and couldn't bluff her way out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say a word yet. I just stood in the home I built and let her hear how her own words sounded, ringing off the walls I'd restored in front of the neighbors, in front of everyone. And then my mother did something I never expected. She stopped. The fight went out of her all at once, and she sat down, actually sat on the arm of the chair I'd reupholstered, and she put her face in her hands. And when she spoke again, her voice was different. Old, small. You don't understand, she said, but not like an accusation now, like a confession. My mother, your grandmother, she never thought I could hold on to anything. My whole life, Ruth used to look at me and say I was the kind of person things slip away from, that I couldn't keep a house, keep money, keep anything. She laughed, a terrible broken sound. And now she's reached out of the grave and proven it in front of everybody. She left it to you to show me she was right. My father had come to stand behind her, one hand on her shoulder, his eyes wet. And I saw it then. The whole grinding machine of my family laid bare. My mother had spent her life terrified she was the daughter who couldn't keep things, so she'd made sure to be the one who took them. She'd done to me exactly what had been done to her, handed the strong daughter the burden and the weak one the indulgence, because that was the only shape love had ever come in for her. She looked up at me, ruined, and said, "Please don't cut us out the way she cut me out. Don't do to us what your grandmother just did to me in front of the whole street." I couldn't bear it twice. And God help me, I felt it, one clean flash of it, because she wasn't wrong that she'd been hurt decades ago by the same woman I'd loved most. She was a person who'd been broken in exactly the place she'd broken me. But feeling it didn't make what she'd done to me right. And I had a choice to make standing there that no lawyer and no document could make for me. I had all the cards. I want you to understand that completely, because it's the whole point. The house was mine, free and clear. The law behind me. The money was mine enough to never work another hard day if I didn't want to. I could have had Fisk hand my mother the recorded documents and walk them all out the door and never see any of them again. And I'd have been within my rights, and a lot of you would have cheered. For about 3 seconds standing in that hall, I wanted to. Then I looked at Ruth's chestnut wall and I thought about what she'd actually asked me. Not get even. Not win. Keep it. Don't let it become money. And I understood that if I threw my family out in the street to save her being right, I'd have kept the house and lost the exact thing keeping it was supposed to protect. So I made my choice out loud in front of all of them. "I'm keeping the house," I said, and my voice was steady and quiet, and it filled the room more than my mother's shouting had. "That's not up for discussion. Grandma asked me to keep it, and I kept it, and I'm going to keep it. It's not an asset, it's not for sale. It's my home, and it stays mine." Callie made a small broken sound. I turned to her. "But the money Grandma left with it, I didn't know it existed until this morning. And I've lived without it my whole life. So I'm going to use it to clear your debt, Callie. All of it. The credit cards. Whatever's behind on the apartment. You'll start clean." My sister stared at me like she didn't understand the language. "Nora, you don't after everything." "Why would you? Because I have it, and you're drowning." I said, "That's the whole reason. It's not a bribe and it's not forgiveness. It's just the right thing. And for once, I can afford to do it." Then I looked at my mother, still sitting there hollowed out on the arm of the chair. "You can visit," I said. "The door stays mine, but it isn't locked to you. Once a year, holidays, whatever we can manage. That's what I can give. It's more than you gave me, and it's the most I have." The cost of it landed on me even as I said it, the money I'd never spend on myself, the mother who'd never once thank me. The easy rich life I was handing away by the fistful in my own front hall. Everything I'd won and everything it would cost me arrived in the same breath, and I let it. Something came loose in me when I said it, and it took me a while afterward to name what it was. My whole life I'd believed so deep, I never even saw the belief that I only got to stay if I was useful. That love was a thing you earned by fixing, carrying, giving way, being the strong one who needs nothing. I'd rebuilt that entire house partly, if I'm honest, still hoping some corner of me would finally be seen and kept. And standing there, having just given away a fortune to a family that had never once chosen me, I felt the strangest thing. I didn't need them to. I wasn't giving Callie that money to buy my way back into their good graces. I was giving it because I finally had enough. Not just money, enough to give freely and want nothing back. That was the thing Ruth had been trying to teach me since I was 11 with a putty knife, too big for my hands. You'll thank me when you can fix your own life, not the plumbing. The house was never going to make me worthy of being kept. I'd been worthy the whole time from the first summer she measured me in that doorway. And I'd spent 30 years too busy proving it to believe it. I looked around the front hall, the light, the wood, Ruth's door, and for the first time, I wasn't standing in it as the daughter who'd earned her place by working herself to the bone. I was just home. Not because I'd fixed enough, just because it was mine, and I was hers, and that had always been enough. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 3 years. Then I opened the front door the rest of the way and let the morning in. They left quietly, the way people leave when there's nothing left to argue. Callie carried her boxes back out to her car, and at the door she stopped and hugged me, hard, and whispered that she was sorry, and I believed she meant it. The money cleared her debt within the month. She found work again, a smaller job, an honest one, and she started paying her own rent for the first time in her life. She calls me now. Not often, but real. My father shook my hand on the porch, a strange formal thing to do to your own daughter, and I understood it was the only apology he had the courage for. And I took it. My mother went last. She stopped in the doorway in front of Ruth's door and she looked at me for a long moment. And I waited for the thank you I knew wasn't coming. It didn't come. She just nodded once, slow, and something passed behind her eyes that might have been shame or might have been the old grief finally showing. And then she walked to the car. We're not close now. I won't pretend we healed because we didn't. And I've stopped needing us to. Some breaks you don't fix. You just stop pretending they aren't there. Warren was still on the porch through all of it, quietly waiting. And when the cars had gone, he cleared his throat and asked if it was still all right to mount the plaque. I said yes. He drilled the bronze marker into the siding beside Ruth's door, and I stood back and read it. A historic home. And beneath the address, the name of its builder and steward, Ruth Ansley. Her name on the house she saved that I saved, staying right where it belonged. The house is a living thing now, not a trophy on a shelf. A few days a year, I open it to the town. The Historic Commission runs a homes tour, and people walk through Ruth's rooms and put their hands on the chestnut wall the way she used to, and I tell them her story and mine. Kids from the county school come to see how a house gets built, and I show them a putty knife and let them try. And I never do the part they can do themselves. I still fix old houses for a living. But I don't do it anymore to earn my place in the world. I do it because I'm good at it, and because saving old things is worth doing, and those turn out to be enough of a reason. And I did one more thing quietly, with Fisk's help. I wrote my own will. Someday this house will go to someone, maybe a daughter of my own, maybe one of Callie's kids. We'll see who life brings. And when it does, I put in a condition of my own. The same shape as Ruth's. But in my own words, it won't go to whoever can sell it for the most. It'll go to whoever loves it enough to keep it. Whoever's willing to put their hands and their life into holding on to something and ask for nothing back. That's the only kind of person who's ever really owned anything. My grandmother taught me that one board at a time. Now it's written down, waiting, the way hers was. Sometimes in the evening I sit on the front steps of the house I was handed to get rid of, the house that was supposed to be my consolation prize and turned out to be the whole inheritance. And I watch the light go orange over Miller Street the way it did the last day Ruth was ever here. The bronze plaque catches that light beside her door. My tools are inside, put away, waiting for tomorrow's work. And I think about the first winter, sitting at my mother's table with sawdust under my nails, hearing her call 3 years of my life, a little hobby to keep me busy. I think about how sure she was, how sure they all were that I'd take the ruin and say thank you and hand back anything worth having the second they asked. I put my hand flat against the frame of the door I raised from the dead the way Ruth used to touch the wall. Gentle and knowing, and I say it out loud, just to hear it settle into the wood where it belongs. Turns out, it was never just a hobby. It never was. It was the truest thing I ever did. Here's what 3 years and a rusted key taught me. And I'll give it to you, plain, the way Ruth gave everything to me. The people who love a thing enough to keep it, who will pour themselves into it and ask for nothing back, are the only ones who ever truly own it, on paper or off. And no matter how a family votes, no matter whose name is on what, no one can ever take that kind of owning away from you. That's how a rusted key, a will framed on the wall, and a fortune I gave away bought me the one thing they could never hand back or take. A door that's mine. If you've ever been the quiet one who kept the promise nobody clapped for, this story was for you. And yours turns too. Believe me. Subscribe and stay with us here at Revenge Range, where the quiet ones finally get their say.